Something is happening inside the Braxton family that fans were never supposed to see, and this time, the tension may have gone far beyond a simple sisterly disagreement.
It smelled like an onion sandwich. Really? She did. She washed out her armpits. She's okay now. Yeah, she smells good now. I got a wife that smells like onion burger a little bit. But you good now. You washed up under there and everything. You good. She took a quick, what they call it.
According to the transcript, claims involving Tamar Braxton, Towanda Braxton, and Sean Hall reportedly pushed an already fragile situation toward a breaking point. What began as whispers and uncomfortable questions allegedly turned into a confrontation so intense that people nearby felt the need to step in. But here's where this story gets complicated. There is no confirmed evidence in the provided material proving that a physical attack actually occurred. The transcript itself repeatedly describes the alleged escalation as unconfirmed, saying there was no confirmed strike and no footage establishing exactly what happened. So what could have pushed the sisters this far? Why did speculation surrounding Sean Hall allegedly become such a sensitive issue? And why does Towanda's side reportedly see this as a question of trust and boundaries, while Tamar's side appears to view the situation as a narrative that has spiraled beyond reality?
Tony and Tamar Tony came to us first and say, hey guys, LaFace wants to sign me. How do y'all feel about it? With Tamar, it wasn't like that. She didn't come to us and tell us, hey guys, I have an opportunity. It was nothing like that.
As soon as when I found out about it, she tried to sugarcoat it.
The deeper you look, the more this stops looking like one isolated argument. The transcript points to old tensions, communication problems, family disagreements, and a growing emotional distance that may have been building long before this latest confrontation. And if those claims are even partially accurate, then what happened wasn't the beginning of the drama. It was the breaking point. Because when family members stop communicating, rumors start filling the silence. And when those rumors involve relationships, loyalty, and trust, even one unanswered question can ignite everything. Now the Braxton sisters are facing the question nobody can avoid. Can this family repair the damage, or has this latest confrontation changed their relationship for good? Let's break down exactly how the tension allegedly reached this point. Before the latest controversy involving Towanda Braxton, Tamar Braxton, and Sean Hall allegedly exploded, there was already a complicated history behind the scenes. And that's what makes this situation so interesting. Because if you only look at the latest headline, it can appear as though everything suddenly erupted over one rumor. But family conflicts rarely work that way. Most of the time, the argument people finally see is simply the result of months, or even years, of unresolved emotions. In the Braxton family's case, public attention has followed their relationships, disagreements, careers, and personal struggles for years. The sisters have experienced moments of incredible support, but they have also had periods where disagreements became impossible to ignore. And whenever those disagreements become public, fans immediately start asking the same question: what really happened behind closed doors? That's exactly what happened when speculations surrounding Sean Hall began circulating. The important thing to understand is that speculation is not the same as confirmation. There are claims and interpretations surrounding the situation, but the available material does not establish that every allegation circulating online is true. That distinction matters, because once a celebrity rumor starts spreading, it can become almost impossible to control. One person hears something, another person repeats it. A social media post adds another interpretation. Then fans begin connecting unrelated moments. Before long, a private disagreement can become a massive public storyline. And that's reportedly where the tension involving Towanda and Tamar began becoming more complicated. According to the storyline presented in the transcript, Towanda allegedly became increasingly uncomfortable with the speculation and believed that certain boundaries had been crossed. Tamar, meanwhile, was portrayed as frustrated by the assumptions surrounding her name, and this created a classic family conflict. One side believes the issue needs to be confronted. The other believes confronting it only gives the rumor more power. Neither approach necessarily solves the problem. Instead, the disagreement can become bigger, and that's exactly what allegedly happened. What makes this especially sensitive is that Sean Hall isn't just a random name appearing in a celebrity rumor. His connection to Tamar has been part of public discussion for years. That history means even a vague comment can be interpreted in multiple ways. A simple interaction can suddenly become evidence. A photograph can become a theory. A social media post can become a supposed message. And once fans start interpreting everything through the lens of a rumor, even innocent behavior can look suspicious. That's why Tamar's reported frustration makes sense from one perspective. Imagine having people constantly analyzing your relationships and then turning ordinary moments into a storyline. At some point, you may feel like there is no way to win. If you respond, people say you're defensive. If you stay silent, people say your silence confirms the rumor. And if you laugh it off, people may interpret that as another clue. It's an impossible situation, but Towanda's alleged perspective creates another side to the story. From her reported point of view, this wasn't simply about social media gossip. It was about boundaries. It was about communication. And most importantly, it was about trust. Those are very different things. A rumor can disappear tomorrow, but if someone believes their boundaries have been ignored, the emotional damage can last much longer. That is why the tension reportedly became so intense. The problem wasn't necessarily the original speculation. The problem was what the speculation represented. It forced questions about loyalty. It raised questions about what family members knew. And it created uncertainty about who was saying what behind the scenes. Once those questions entered the conversation, emotions reportedly started rising. And that's when the conflict stopped being just a celebrity story. It became personal. Family disagreements are different from ordinary celebrity disputes because there is history behind every sentence. When a stranger criticizes you, you can walk away. When a family member says something that hurts you, the words can carry years of emotional baggage. One argument can reopen 5 older arguments. One accusation can remind someone of something that happened years ago. And suddenly, the people aren't arguing about the original issue anymore. They're arguing about everything. That's why the Braxton situation reportedly became so emotional. The tension wasn't existing in isolation. It was sitting on top of a much larger family history. And when the latest controversy appeared, it allegedly pushed those old emotions closer to the surface. Still, there's an important point that shouldn't be overlooked. The available material does not prove that every dramatic version of the confrontation is accurate. In particular, claims that the disagreement definitely became physical should be treated cautiously. The transcript itself acknowledges uncertainty about whether an actual physical attack occurred and notes the absence of confirmed footage proving such an event. That means the most responsible way to discuss this story is to separate what is alleged from what is established. And that actually makes the story more interesting, because the central issue doesn't depend on proving that someone physically attacked someone else. The emotional conflict is enough. Towanda allegedly felt that the situation had crossed a line. Tamar allegedly felt that the situation was being misunderstood. And Sean Hall's name became caught in the middle. That is a dangerous combination, because when two people have different versions of reality, communication becomes everything. If they talk privately and honestly, the conflict can sometimes be resolved. But if they communicate through other family members, social media, or public statements, the misunderstanding can grow. And that's where the Braxton family drama appears to have reached another level. Fans were watching, social media was reacting, and every new comment had the potential to make things worse. The public naturally wanted answers, but the people actually involved were the only ones who could provide them. And even then, they might not agree on what happened. That's the uncomfortable truth about family drama. There isn't always one universally accepted version. Two people can experience the same conversation and remember it completely differently. One person remembers a warning. Another remembers an accusation. One remembers defending themselves. Another remembers being attacked verbally. And when emotions are high, those differences become even sharper. That's why this story cannot simply be reduced to Towanda versus Tamar. It's more complicated than that. It's about trust. It's about boundaries. It's about public speculation. It's about family history. And it's about what happens when private disagreements become entertainment for millions of people. But just when it seemed like the situation couldn't become more complicated, another issue entered the picture. The question wasn't only what Towanda allegedly thought about the situation, it was also what Tamar believed Towanda was trying to do. Was Towanda trying to protect the family? Was she trying to confront a rumor before it became bigger? Or did Tamar feel like she was being unfairly targeted? That difference in perception could be the key to understanding everything that followed. Because once Tamar reportedly felt that the situation was no longer about clarification, but about judgment, the emotional temperature changed. And that is where the story begins, moving toward the confrontation everyone is now talking about. The next question becomes even more important. What exactly was said when Towanda and Tamar finally stopped holding back? The tension had already been building, but according to the storyline, the real turning point came when the conversation could no longer remain indirect. What had previously been whispers, speculation, and uncomfortable questions allegedly became a direct confrontation. And once Towanda and Tamar were face to face, there was no easy way to control where the conversation would go. Towanda reportedly wanted answers, not another rumor. Not another social media interpretation. Not another conversation happening through other people. She wanted the situation addressed directly, but Tamar allegedly saw the situation differently. From her perspective, the constant speculation surrounding Sean Hall had become exhausting. Instead of allowing the rumors to disappear, every new discussion seemed to give them more life, and that created an immediate clash. One sister wanted clarity, the other wanted the speculation to stop. Those two goals may sound similar, but emotionally, they can lead in completely opposite directions. Because when someone demands an explanation, the other person can feel accused, even if the person asking believes they're simply looking for the truth. That is reportedly where the conversation became heated. Voices rose, old frustrations began resurfacing, and the subject was no longer limited to Sean Hall. Suddenly, according to the storyline, the sisters were talking about years of disagreements, misunderstandings, and moments when one felt unsupported by the other. That's how family arguments become dangerous emotionally. The original issue can become almost irrelevant. What matters is everything underneath it. Every unresolved conversation, every time someone felt ignored, every time someone believed another family member crossed a line, and every time somebody chose silence instead of addressing the problem. All of those memories can come rushing back during one confrontation. That's reportedly what made this situation so intense. The Sean Hall speculation may have been the spark, but the emotional fuel had been building for much longer. And once that fuel caught fire, the conversation became increasingly difficult to control. People around them reportedly noticed the change in atmosphere. What had started as a private disagreement was becoming impossible to ignore. The tension was visible, and according to the storyline, other people began trying to prevent the situation from becoming even more serious. But there was another problem. Neither side wanted to feel like they were backing down. Towanda allegedly felt she had the right to ask questions. Tamar allegedly felt she had the right to defend herself. And when both people believe they are protecting themselves, compromise becomes much harder. One statement leads to another. A response becomes sharper. Someone brings up something from the past. The other person responds with an even older grievance, and suddenly the conversation has moved miles away from where it started. That appears to be what happened here. The focus shifted from what is true about Sean Hall to something much deeper. Why don't we trust each other anymore? That question can hurt far more than the original rumor, because family members expect a certain level of loyalty. When that expectation breaks down, even a small disagreement can feel like betrayal. And that's reportedly what made the situation so emotional for Tamar. Instead of feeling supported by her sister, she allegedly felt judged. Instead of feeling heard, she felt that assumptions were being placed on her. And once that feeling entered the conversation, the argument became less about facts and more about emotion. Towanda, meanwhile, reportedly remained focused on boundaries. She allegedly believed that certain lines had been crossed and that pretending everything was fine would only create bigger problems later. From her perspective, silence wasn't necessarily peace. It could simply mean the problem was waiting to explode again. And that difference in philosophy is important. Some people handle family conflict by talking immediately. Others need distance. Some demand answers. Others shut down. Some want everything clarified. Others believe certain things should remain private. Neither approach automatically makes someone right. But when two people with opposite approaches collide, the argument can escalate quickly. And that's reportedly what happened. The conversation became louder, the emotions became stronger, and the people around them began paying attention. But here's where we need to slow down. The source material does not establish every dramatic detail that has circulated online. There is no confirmed evidence in the provided material proving that the confrontation became a physical assault. The transcript specifically acknowledges uncertainty surrounding claims of physical contact and notes that there was no confirmed footage establishing exactly what happened. So while the emotional confrontation is central to the storyline, claims about a physical altercation should remain clearly identified as allegations rather than established facts. And that distinction matters because online drama can quickly turn uncertainty into certainty. A rumor becomes a headline, the headline becomes a video. The video becomes proof, but repetition isn't confirmation. The safest conclusion from the material is that there was allegedly a serious emotional confrontation surrounding the speculation and the sisters' underlying tensions, while the most extreme claims remain unverified. And that actually raises an even bigger question. Why did this particular issue become such a trigger? Because Sean Hall wasn't simply a random name. His history with Tamar made the speculation emotionally complicated. And whenever romantic relationships intersect with family dynamics, boundaries become even harder to define. Who gets to ask questions? Who gets to comment? Who needs to stay out of it? And at what point does concern become interference? Those questions reportedly sat at the center of the conflict. Towanda allegedly believed she was addressing something that needed to be addressed. Tamar allegedly believed the conversation itself had become unfair. And neither side appeared willing to simply let the matter disappear. That is when the situation reportedly reached its most emotional point. The argument was no longer quiet. People knew something was happening, and the possibility of the family conflict becoming public was suddenly very real. For Tamar, that reportedly created another layer of frustration. She had already spent years dealing with public scrutiny. Now a private family issue was potentially becoming another spectacle, and the irony was impossible to miss. The more everyone tried to control the story, the more attention the story received. That's the problem with celebrity controversy. Privacy can disappear the moment other people start discussing your private life publicly. And once social media gets involved, controlling the narrative becomes almost impossible. Everyone has a version. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone believes they know what happened. But the people actually involved may be the only ones who know what was truly said. That is why the next stage of this story becomes so important. Because after the confrontation, the question wasn't simply whether Towanda and Tamar were still angry. The question was whether their relationship could actually recover. Could the sisters sit down and talk without the speculation getting in the way? Could they separate their family history from the current controversy? Could Sean Hall's name finally disappear from the middle of their disagreement? Or had the latest confrontation created a deeper fracture that would be much harder to repair? And then came the aftermath. the silence, the reactions, the questions from fans, and the growing realization that this wasn't just another Braxton disagreement. It had become a test of whether family loyalty could survive when trust starts to disappear. Because once trust is questioned inside a family, even an apology may not be enough to put everything back together. After the confrontation, the biggest problem wasn't the argument itself. It was what the argument revealed. For years, the Braxton sisters had experienced their share of disagreements. But family conflict is different when the issue involves trust. Once someone begins questioning another person's intentions, every future conversation can carry that tension. And according to the storyline, that's exactly what happened. The Sean Hall speculation had allegedly created a situation where neither side felt completely understood. Towanda reportedly believed that the issue needed to be addressed directly. Tamar reportedly felt that she was being placed under suspicion over something that had never been properly established. And somewhere between those two positions, communication began breaking down. That is when the aftermath became more complicated than the original confrontation. Instead of asking, "What happened?" people were now asking, "Who can we trust?" And that is a much harder question to answer. When family members disagree publicly, fans immediately begin choosing sides. Some defend Tamar, others sympathize with Towanda. Some blame Sean Hall for becoming part of the controversy. Others argue that none of the outside speculation should have mattered in the first place. But the people watching from the outside don't experience the emotional history behind the disagreement. They see one moment. The family members involved see years. That difference is enormous. A single sentence can mean something completely different when it comes from someone you've known your entire life. And according to the storyline, the sisters were no longer arguing only about the present. Old frustrations were reportedly resurfacing. Past misunderstandings were being reconsidered. And things that may have seemed insignificant years earlier suddenly appeared much more important. That's one of the most dangerous stages of a family argument, when the past starts being used as evidence for the present. "You did this before. You said that before. You never supported me. You always take their side." Those statements don't solve the original problem. They make it bigger. And once the argument reaches that level, even an apology can become complicated. Because what exactly are you apologizing for? The rumor? The confrontation? The words? The misunderstanding? Or the years of resentment underneath everything? That's why the alleged aftermath became so important. The question was no longer whether Tamar and Towanda disagreed. They clearly did. The question was whether they could separate the disagreement from their relationship as sisters. And that's where family loyalty becomes complicated. You can disagree with someone and still love them. You can be angry with someone and still want them in your life. You can believe they handled something badly without wanting the entire relationship destroyed. But when public attention gets involved, those distinctions become harder to maintain. Because suddenly, every disagreement becomes a headline. Every silence becomes suspicious. Every social media post becomes a potential message. And every family gathering becomes something fans want to analyze. That's an enormous amount of pressure, especially when the people involved may simply want time to process what happened. According to the storyline, the tension surrounding Tamar and Towanda reportedly continued after the confrontation. Neither side appeared ready to completely dismiss the issue, and the longer the disagreement remained unresolved, the more room there was for outside speculation. That created a dangerous cycle. Rumor creates tension. Tension creates distance. Distance creates more rumors. More rumors create even greater tension. And suddenly the original issue becomes almost impossible to identify. This is where Sean Hall's role in the story becomes particularly interesting. Because although his name sits at the center of the speculation, the deeper conflict appears to involve something larger than one person. It involves boundaries. If a family member believes something needs to be discussed, when does asking questions become crossing a line? And if another family member feels unfairly judged, when does defending yourself become shutting down communication? There may not be a simple answer. Both sides can believe they are protecting themselves. Both sides can feel hurt. And both sides can walk away convinced that the other person doesn't understand them. That's how relationships become fractured, not always because someone wants them to end, sometimes because nobody knows how to move forward. And then there is the public. Fans can unintentionally make family reconciliation harder. Imagine trying to resolve a disagreement privately while thousands of strangers are debating who was right. Every statement gets analyzed, every photograph gets scrutinized, every interaction becomes evidence. Even if the sisters wanted to move past the controversy, the internet could keep bringing it back. That's why public figures sometimes refuse to address rumors. Silence can be a form of protection, but silence can also create more speculation. And that leaves celebrities trapped between two impossible choices: speak and risk making the story bigger. Stay silent and risk allowing others to tell the story for you. The Braxton situation illustrates that dilemma perfectly. The more people wanted answers, the more complicated the answers became, and the more complicated the situation became, the harder it was to explain in one simple statement. Still, one point deserves emphasis. The source material does not establish that every allegation circulating online is true. In particular, the most dramatic claims about physical violence remain unconfirmed in the provided material. The transcript itself acknowledges uncertainty about whether any physical strike occurred, and says there is no confirmed footage establishing the exact sequence of events. That means the real story, based on the material available, is the escalating family conflict and speculation, not a proven physical assault. And that distinction should not be ignored simply because a more dramatic version makes a better headline. Sometimes the emotional truth of a conflict is powerful enough without adding details that haven't been established. The alleged disagreement already raises serious questions. Why did communication break down? Why did the Sean Hall speculation become so emotionally charged? Why did the sisters reportedly feel unable to resolve the issue privately? And most importantly, can they rebuild trust? Because if they can, this could eventually become another difficult chapter in the Braxton family's history. But if they cannot, the consequences could last much longer. Family relationships can survive arguments. They can survive misunderstandings. They can even survive periods of distance. But trust is different. Once someone believes another family member doesn't have their back, rebuilding that trust takes time. It requires honest conversations. It requires boundaries. And sometimes it requires admitting that both people contributed to the problem. That's difficult for anyone. For celebrities, it's even harder, because the entire process can happen under public scrutiny. And now, fans are waiting to see what happens next. Will Tamar address the situation? Will Towanda clarify her position? Will Sean Hall say anything? Or will everyone simply step away from the controversy and allow the situation to cool down? The answer could determine whether this becomes a temporary family disagreement or another long-running Braxton feud. But one thing is already clear. The controversy has exposed something much deeper than a simple rumor. It has exposed how fragile communication can become when family, relationships, and public attention collide. And the next stage may be the most revealing of all, because after the anger fades, people have to decide what they actually want. Do they want to be right, or do they want their family back? Once word of the alleged confrontation began circulating, the situation moved beyond the family. Now the audience had entered the story, and that changed everything. Fans who had followed the Braxton family for years immediately began revisiting the history between the sisters. Old interviews resurfaced. Previous disagreements were discussed again. People started comparing past moments with the latest controversy and trying to determine whether this was simply another argument or evidence of a much deeper fracture. But there was a problem. The public wasn't hearing one unified story. Different interpretations were emerging, and each version made the situation look completely different. Some people believed Tamar was being unfairly dragged into speculation involving Sean Hall. Others believed Towanda had legitimate reasons to question what was happening. And some fans argued that outsiders should stop trying to turn a family disagreement into entertainment. That last point became especially important, because celebrity families live under a microscope. When something happens privately, the people involved can sit down, talk, disagree, apologize, and move on. But when thousands or millions of people are watching, every step becomes complicated. A simple disagreement can suddenly become a trending topic. And once something trends, everyone wants an explanation. That's when the pressure starts. Fans want Tamar to speak. Fans want Towanda to respond. People want Sean Hall to clarify his position. And every hour of silence creates another theory. But silence doesn't necessarily mean guilt. It doesn't necessarily mean anger. And it doesn't necessarily mean someone has something to hide. Sometimes people simply don't want to discuss their private family problems publicly. That's a perfectly reasonable possibility. Still, social media doesn't operate that way. The internet hates unanswered questions. If there isn't an official explanation, someone will create one. And once a theory sounds convincing enough, people start treating it like fact. That is exactly why this controversy needs to be approached carefully. The source material supports the existence of intense family tension and speculation, but it does not establish every dramatic claim being circulated online. Most importantly, the alleged physical escalation remains unconfirmed. The material itself notes that there was no confirmed footage establishing exactly what happened. So while some headlines may describe the situation in the most extreme possible terms, the available material doesn't justify presenting those claims as proven facts. And yet the emotional fallout can still be significant. Because even without a confirmed physical altercation, words can leave damage. A family member feeling accused can carry that feeling for years. A sister feeling unsupported can become distant. A disagreement over one person can become a disagreement over loyalty. And once the public becomes involved, reconciliation becomes even more difficult. Imagine trying to apologize when thousands of strangers have already decided who was right. Imagine trying to explain yourself when every sentence can become another headline. Imagine trying to rebuild trust while people online are waiting for the next fight. That's the environment the Braxton family is dealing with, and it's why the aftermath may be more important than the original confrontation. The real test isn't whether Tamar and Towanda disagree. Families disagree. The real test is whether they can communicate after the disagreement. Can they sit down without cameras? Can they talk without accusations? Can they acknowledge each other's feelings? Can they establish boundaries around personal relationships? And can they stop outside speculation from controlling the family dynamic? Those questions are far more important than the latest viral headline, because if they can't answer them, the conflict could continue. And if they can, this controversy could eventually become another chapter that they leave behind. But fans are also asking about Sean Hall. Why has his name become so central to this discussion? The answer may be simpler than the internet wants it to be. When a relationship becomes part of a family disagreement, the person at the center can become symbolic of everything else going wrong. The issue may appear to be about one relationship, but underneath it may be about boundaries, trust, communication, and old resentment. That's why simply removing Sean Hall from the conversation wouldn't necessarily solve the deeper problem. The sisters would still have to address what caused them to feel disconnected in the first place. And that is probably the hardest conversation. Because talking about another person is easier than talking about your relationship with your own sister. It's easier to say, "This is about Sean," than to admit, "I'm hurt because I don't feel like you trust me." It's easier to argue about a rumor than to discuss years of unresolved emotions. And perhaps that's why this controversy became so intense. The rumor was only the visible part. The deeper issues were underneath. Now, public reaction has created another layer. Fans are choosing sides. Comment sections are becoming battlegrounds. and social media posts are being interpreted as possible responses. But there is a danger in all of this. When audiences choose sides too aggressively, they can unintentionally make reconciliation harder. If Tamar and Towanda eventually decide to repair their relationship, they may have to do so while thousands of people who supported one side are expecting them to stay angry. That's a strange position to be in. A celebrity can forgive someone privately and still face backlash from fans who don't believe forgiveness is deserved. But family members aren't obligated to follow the audience's emotional script. They have to decide what they want. Maybe they want distance. Maybe they want reconciliation. Maybe they need time. Maybe they simply want the controversy to disappear. Whatever they choose, it has to be their decision. And that brings us to the biggest question surrounding this story. What happens now? Because the next move could completely change the narrative. If Tamar speaks publicly, she could clarify her position, or accidentally create another round of speculation. If Towanda responds, she could explain what she meant, or reveal that the disagreement is deeper than anyone realized. If Sean Hall addresses the situation, he could potentially shut down some of the speculation, or his comments could create even more questions. And if everyone stays silent, the internet will almost certainly continue creating theories. That's the frustrating reality. There may be no perfect response. Every option has consequences, but perhaps the healthiest option is the simplest one. Let the people involved decide what deserves to remain private. Not every family disagreement needs a public verdict. Not every rumor deserves a response. And not every viral claim should be treated as fact. What matters most is whether the people involved can eventually communicate honestly. Because beneath the headlines, these are still family relationships. And family relationships don't fit neatly into viral clips. They are complicated. They contain history. They contain love. They contain disappointment. And sometimes they contain resentment that takes years to understand. That's why this story is far from over. The next chapter won't necessarily be another explosive confrontation. It could be something much quieter, a conversation, a clarification, an apology, or simply distance. And honestly, that may tell us more than another dramatic headline ever could. Because when the cameras stop rolling and the social media comments disappear, Tamar and Towanda still have to live with whatever happened between them. The audience can move on to the next celebrity story. They can close the app. They can stop watching. But family members don't have that luxury. They have to decide whether this disagreement becomes another permanent scar or the moment they finally confront the problems that have been building underneath the surface. And that's where the next chapter begins. At this point, the biggest mistake would be assuming that this entire situation is simply about Sean Hall. Because the deeper you look at the alleged conflict between Towanda and Tamar, the more it appears to be about something much bigger: trust. The Sean Hall speculation may have brought the tension to the surface, but family disagreements this intense rarely come from one conversation alone. There is usually history underneath. There are old misunderstandings. There are moments when someone felt ignored. There are conversations that never happened. And eventually, one new controversy becomes the trigger that brings everything back. That appears to be the bigger story here. Towanda reportedly wanted boundaries respected. Tamar reportedly wanted the speculation surrounding her to stop. Both positions can exist at the same time. And that's what makes family conflict so difficult. One person can genuinely feel hurt, while the other genuinely believes they did nothing wrong. Neither person necessarily has to be lying. They may simply be experiencing the same situation from completely different emotional perspectives. And when that happens, facts alone don't always solve the problem. Because the real argument becomes, do you understand why I'm hurt? That's a completely different question from who is right. And perhaps that's why the controversy has continued to attract attention. Fans want a winner. But family disputes don't usually have winners. Even when one person proves their point, the relationship can still be damaged. That's particularly true when the disagreement becomes public. Once thousands of people know about a family conflict, the people involved can no longer control the conversation. Everyone becomes an expert. Everyone has a theory. Everyone believes they know what happened. And suddenly, the actual people involved are surrounded by opinions from people who weren't there. That can make reconciliation incredibly difficult. Imagine Tamar wanting to move past the situation. She might still have to see headlines suggesting she is hiding something. Imagine Towanda wanting to explain her perspective. She might then face criticism from fans who believe she's attacking her sister. There is no easy path. That's why the most important development may not be another dramatic statement. It may be what happens privately. If Tamar and Towanda sit down and actually talk, the entire situation could change. Maybe they discover that the conflict was based on misunderstandings. Maybe they realize that outside speculation exaggerated what was happening. Maybe they establish boundaries that prevent similar arguments in the future. Or perhaps they discover that the underlying problems are deeper than anyone realized. That's the possibility fans are really waiting to understand. Because the public argument is only the visible part. The invisible part is what happens afterward. Do they call each other? Do they apologize? Do they avoid each other? Do other family members become involved? Or do they simply decide to move forward separately? There is another important issue that shouldn't be ignored. The dramatic claims circulating around the confrontation need to be treated carefully. The source material does not establish that a physical attack definitely occurred. In fact, it specifically acknowledges uncertainty and notes that there was no confirmed footage proving the alleged physical escalation. That means the most sensational versions of the story should not automatically be treated as fact. The emotional conflict is one thing, an alleged physical incident is another, and those two things should not be blurred together. This distinction actually makes the story more credible because it acknowledges what is known and what remains uncertain. The confirmed emotional tension is enough to explain why fans are talking. There is no need to manufacture details. The Braxton family's history already provides plenty of context. Their relationships have been discussed publicly for years. Their disagreements have often become part of the entertainment conversation, and fans have developed strong opinions about each sister. That's why any new conflict can immediately become explosive. People aren't watching one isolated event. They're watching it through the lens of everything that came before. And that creates another problem: confirmation bias. If someone already believes Tamar and Towanda have a difficult relationship, they're more likely to interpret every disagreement as proof. If someone already supports Tamar, they may interpret Towanda's actions as unfair. If someone strongly identifies with Towanda, they may see Tamar's response as defensive. Everyone starts with a conclusion, then they search for evidence that supports it. That's exactly how celebrity rumors become stronger than the available facts. And social media makes the process even faster. A short clip can remove all context. A headline can turn an allegation into a statement. A reaction can be presented as proof. And before long, the audience is arguing about something that may not even have happened in the way they're imagining. That's why the next stage of this story matters. If either sister eventually addresses the controversy clearly, it could shut down some of the speculation. But if they remain silent, fans will probably continue filling in the gaps. And the longer the silence continues, the more narratives can develop. Some may be harmless, others may be completely wrong. That's the price of being famous in the social media era. Privacy doesn't necessarily prevent speculation. Sometimes it creates more of it. But there's also another possibility. Maybe the sisters don't owe the public an explanation. Maybe they can have a family disagreement without turning it into a public trial. That's difficult for fans to accept because celebrity culture creates the illusion that public figures are obligated to explain themselves. They're not. They can keep personal conversations private. They can refuse interviews. They can choose not to respond. And they can decide that family issues belong inside the family. If that's what Tamar and Towanda ultimately choose, fans may never get every answer. And that's okay, because the most important outcome isn't whether the internet gets a satisfying story. It's whether the people involved can find peace. That's especially true when the conflict involves siblings. You can replace a business partner. You can stop working with a colleague. You can unfollow someone. But family relationships are different. Even when people separate emotionally, the history remains. And that history can make reconciliation possible. But it can also make conflict much more painful. So what does the future look like? There are several possibilities. The first is reconciliation. The sisters could eventually talk, clear up misunderstandings, and move forward. The second is temporary distance. They may decide that emotions are too high and that space is necessary before they can communicate properly. The third is a longer-term fracture. If the underlying trust issues are serious enough, the controversy could become another chapter in an already complicated family relationship. And then there is a fourth possibility. They simply stop discussing it publicly. The controversy fades, the headlines disappear, and the sisters deal with whatever remains privately. That may actually be the most realistic outcome, because celebrity drama has a short attention span. Today's controversy becomes tomorrow's forgotten story, but family relationships don't disappear when the headlines do. That's why the real story may take months, or even years, to understand. Maybe someday Tamar or Towanda will explain what really happened. Maybe they'll look back and say the entire situation was misunderstood. Maybe they'll reveal that the conflict had been building long before anyone knew. Or maybe they'll never discuss it again. Until then, the responsible conclusion is simple. There are serious allegations and conflicting interpretations surrounding the situation. But not every dramatic claim has been independently established. What is clear is that the controversy has raised questions about communication, boundaries, trust, and the complicated relationship between family and public attention. And that may be the biggest takeaway, because when rumors enter a family, the damage isn't always caused by the rumor itself. Sometimes the damage comes from what people start believing about one another because of it. And once that happens, repairing the relationship requires more than denying a headline. It requires rebuilding trust. It requires listening. It requires acknowledging hurt. And most importantly, it requires deciding whether being right matters more than staying connected. That is the question now hanging over Tamar and Towanda, not who won the argument, but can these sisters still find their way back to each other? Now comes the part fans are watching most closely. After all the speculation, emotional tension, and questions surrounding Sean Hall, what happens next for Tamar and Towanda? Because the biggest issue isn't the latest rumor anymore. It's whether the sisters can rebuild the trust that may have been damaged along the way. And that won't happen through social media. It won't happen through fan theories, and it certainly won't happen because one side wins an argument online. If the relationship is going to recover, it will likely require a private conversation where both sisters can finally say what they actually feel, without an audience waiting to judge every word. That's easier said than done. Family members carry history, and when that history includes years of disagreements, one conversation rarely fixes everything. But it can be the beginning. The first step would be separating the Sean Hall speculation from the actual relationship between Tamar and Towanda. Because those are two different issues. Whatever the truth behind the speculation may be, the sisters still have to decide how they want to communicate with each other. Do they trust one another? Do they respect each other's boundaries? Can they disagree without assuming the worst? Those questions matter far more than any viral headline. And there's another important possibility. Maybe the situation has already been exaggerated by the internet. Celebrity stories often become more dramatic with every retelling. A disagreement becomes a confrontation. A confrontation becomes a feud. A feud becomes an alleged attack. And eventually, people are discussing a version of events that may be very different from what actually happened. The source material itself warns us about that problem. the most dramatic physical allegations remain unconfirmed, with no established footage proving exactly what occurred. So the responsible conclusion is not to declare that an attack definitely happened. The responsible conclusion is that there was reportedly serious tension, while some of the most extreme claims remain uncertain. That distinction matters, because once a false version of a family conflict becomes established online, correcting it can be almost impossible. The story has already taken on a life of its own, and the people involved may have to live with assumptions they never created. That's one of the biggest challenges facing Tamar and Towanda now. Even if they privately resolve the issue, fans may continue discussing the old version. Even if they forgive each other, social media may continue expecting another fight. And even if Sean Hall says nothing, his name may continue appearing whenever the sisters are mentioned together. That's why stepping away from the public conversation could ultimately be the healthiest option. But will they? That's the question. Tamar has never been someone fans expect to remain silent forever. Her personality is strong, her voice is recognizable, and when she feels misunderstood, audiences often expect her to address it. Towanda has her own perspective, and if she believes boundaries were crossed, she may eventually want to explain her position as well. If either sister speaks, the next question becomes, will their statements finally settle the controversy, or create another wave of drama? That's impossible to predict. One sentence could calm everything down. Another could reopen every old wound. That's why public statements are so risky when emotions are still fresh. Sometimes saying less is actually saying more. And perhaps the sisters understand that. Maybe they're choosing to process the situation privately. Maybe they're waiting until emotions settle. Or maybe they're simply deciding that the public doesn't need to know everything. Whatever the reason, fans should be prepared for the possibility that there won't be a dramatic final explanation. And that's okay. Not every family conflict receives a perfect ending. Sometimes people simply establish new boundaries. Sometimes they become closer. Sometimes they remain distant. And sometimes the relationship changes permanently without either person announcing it. The future could go in any of those directions. But there is one thing this controversy has made obvious. The Braxton family continues to attract enormous attention because people care about the personalities involved. That attention can be powerful. It can create careers, it can build audiences, it can turn ordinary moments into unforgettable television. But it also has a cost. Privacy becomes difficult. Family disagreements become public entertainment. And personal relationships can become storylines before the people involved have even had time to process them. That's why this situation deserves more nuance than a simple sister feud headline. There are allegations, there are interpretations, there are emotions, and there are facts that remain unknown. The most important thing is not to confuse those categories, because once speculation becomes fact, the conversation stops being about understanding what happened. It becomes about defending a version of the story, and that's when reconciliation becomes even harder. If Tamar and Towanda want to repair their relationship, they need room to create their own version of what happened, not the version created by thousands of strangers online. They need to be able to say, "I felt hurt. I felt misunderstood. I thought you crossed a boundary. I didn't realize that's how you felt." Those conversations can be uncomfortable, but they're often more productive than public arguments. And perhaps that's what the next chapter should be about. Not another explosion, not another rumor, not another dramatic headline, but clarity. Because clarity is what has been missing from this entire situation. Fans want to know what really happened, but only the people involved can provide that answer. Until then, everything else remains interpretation. And that includes the biggest question: what exactly happened between Tamar, Towanda, and Sean Hall? We may get an answer, we may not. But if the sisters choose to speak, the most meaningful revelation may not involve Sean Hall at all. It may reveal how they really feel about each other. Because underneath the controversy is a relationship that existed long before the latest rumor. Two sisters, two different personalities, two different perspectives, and years of family history. That's what makes this story so much bigger than one headline. The Sean Hall speculation may have triggered the latest controversy, but the real story is what happens when trust inside a family begins to crack. Can it be repaired? Can boundaries be respected? Can old wounds finally be discussed? Or will this become another permanent divide? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, the next chapter won't be decided by the internet. It will be decided by Tamar and Towanda themselves. And if they choose to have that difficult conversation privately, this entire controversy could eventually become something they look back on as a painful moment that taught them how to communicate better. But if the rumors continue, the public pressure continues, and neither side feels heard, the distance could become much harder to close. For now, the story remains unresolved. The speculation remains speculation. The most extreme allegations remain unconfirmed, and the future of the sisters' relationship remains unknown, which leaves fans with one final question. When the cameras disappear and the headlines finally stop, will Tamar and Towanda choose the drama or choose each other? So after all the speculation, all the tension, and all the questions surrounding Tamar, Towanda, and Sean Hall, one thing is still clear. This story is far from settled. The biggest question isn't just what happened during the alleged confrontation, it's what happens after it. Will Tamar finally speak out? Will Towanda explain her side? Will Sean Hall address the speculation, or will the entire situation remain private while the internet continues creating its own theories? And remember, some of the most dramatic claims circulating online remain unconfirmed, so don't mistake speculation for established fact. But that's exactly why this story has people talking, because beneath the rumors is something much more personal, a family relationship that may now be facing another serious test. So what do you think? Was this simply a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion, or is there a much deeper problem between Tamar and Towanda that fans haven't seen yet? Drop your opinion in the comments. And if you want more celebrity drama, family feuds, and the latest twists before everyone else, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay locked in. Because if either Tamar, Towanda, or Sean Hall finally breaks their silence, this story could take another shocking turn.